Good morning, everybody. This is David Bodorf. Uh, Appreciate everybody tuning in today. We've got some pretty significant news regarding the CARES Act funding. And on the phone today with us will be Dan Hughey from IFA, and then I think Paul Joyce and Lori Rogers from Board of Accounts. And so I know it was kind of a quick setup, but the clarification and how CARES Act money can be spent by local units of government is pretty significant. So we wanted to get this information in your hands as soon as possible. And that's why we called this WebEx. And it is being recorded, so we'll be able to share it with others who couldn't call in today. But I'm going to turn it right over to Dan so he can kind of explain the clarification that came from the U.S. Treasury last Monday and what that means for local units of government.
Thanks, David. I have Jim McGough and David Clark from the IFA who are doing most of the groundwork on our CARES Act program for local units of government. I've got if Pam could put up the slide deck, I've got a couple of, we may have some new folks. I'm going to run through the coronavirus relief fund overview real quick. In May, the governor announced that $300 million of COVID funds received from the U.S. Treasury would be made available to reimburse local units of government for incurred and eligible expenses. Those local units of government include counties, cities, and towns. Marion County / Indianapolis got their own allocation of funds. The state's Office of Management Budget has allocated each local unit of government a portion of these relief funds based upon their population. Each community may access their funds to reimburse eligible CARES Act expenses. You can review your community's allocation on the IFA's website. As stated in the U.S. Treasury guidance, the Coronavirus Relief Fund can only be used to cover costs that are, one, necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19, were not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27, 2020, the enactment date of the CARES Act, and were incurred during the periods that began on March 1, 2020. Pam, I just got a message from you. Can nobody hear me?
You're good.
We're good? Okay, thank you. And then the reimbursement period is costs incurred on March 1, 2020 through December 30, 2020. Are we still trying to get the slide deck up, Pam? Thank you. And we're on slide 3 now. Appreciate it. One more. Thank you. I think this is the key guideline that we all have been waiting for clarification from both Treasury and the Office of Inspector General. This was in their frequently asked question guidance from September 2nd. The relief fund is designed to provide ready funding to address unforeseen financial needs and risks created by the COVID public health emergency. For this reason, as a matter of administrative convenience, in light of the emergency nature for this program, a state, territorial, local, or tribal government may presume that payroll costs for public health and public safety employees are payments for services substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency. That is key language there. That means there doesn't have to be any proof that they were working on COVID-19 issues, et cetera. There was some guidance from the Office of Inspector General that was saying we needed that type of documentation. Office of Inspector General, about a week ago, aligned their guidelines and FAQs exactly with Treasury, so now we don't have any hurdles or differing of opinions between the two entities. It was good to have Office of Inspector General on the same page as Treasury because OIG is going to be the ones that come in a year and a half from now and start looking at things. So based upon that guidance, this means that all payroll costs of such employees may be covered using payments from the COVID Relief Fund for services that are provided during the period that begins on March 1, 2020 and ends on December 30, 2020. Next slide. Public safety employees can include your police officers, your sheriffs and your deputies, your firefighters, your emergency medical responders, detention officers, and those who directly support such employees, such as dispatchers and supervisory personnel. Public health employees are employees involved in providing medical and other health services to the patients and supervisory personnel. Employees of public health departments, directly engaged in matters related to public health and related supervisory personnel. Next slide. Based on this update and guidance, the IFA highly recommends that you analyze your public safety and public health payroll costs to determine if you can maximize these costs for reimbursement in order to limit the aggregate number of requests you may have to submit on behalf of your community in order to utilize the majority or all of your available funds. Requesting reimbursement for all eligible public safety costs and public health costs from March 1 to September 30 would likely enable you to draw most, if not all, of your available allocation. The IFA recommends for local governments to first focus on positions stated previously in the previous slide. For positions that are not explicitly stated for public safety and public health per guidance, we would need a description of each position which clearly demonstrates how these positions directly support listed positions in mitigating and responding to COVID public health emergency. I think the key thing we talk about your frontline employees and your supervisory employees in public health and public safety. What we cannot reimburse for is administrative assistance, accounting folks, et cetera. So we want to limit to your public safety folks and your frontline supervisors, and not any what I would call administrative folks past that. Next slide, please. The advantages of prioritizing these public health and public safety employee costs are: one, administrative ease. As we stated, by maximizing these costs for reimbursement, you can likely limit the aggregate number of requests you may have to submit on behalf of your community in order to utilize all of your available funds. Some of you have been very diligent about turning your reimbursement forms in. We appreciate that. But if we can get, this one filing for your public safety costs and help you, go through your allocation or meet your allocation, that's going to be a lot less work for, I think, for not only you as the entity, but for us as we're reviewing these. Also allows you for more flexibility for use of these funds. Once your funds are deposited in your local account, and a transfer and use of those funds would be at your elected official's discretion in accordance with the State Board of Accounts rules for CARES Act funds. This could include transferring reimbursements for payroll expense into the local government's general fund. Next slide, please. We have directions for submitting reimbursement for public safety. Your first reimbursement request should be for all payroll costs incurred beginning March 1, 2020 through September 30, 2020. Additional reimbursement requests will be submitted monthly if allocated funds are still available for your entity. Supporting documentation should include payroll, time and/or human resource records to support the submitted costs incurred for payroll expenses. Records should clearly demonstrate that the public safety and public health positions submitted for reimbursement are limited to positions listed on slide 5 in this presentation. The IFA will make reimbursement requests for public safety and public health expenses a priority for review over all the other designated expense categories that are allowable on our website. We're really going to try to focus on public safety because we think we're going to have a large volume, plus it's going to have a lot more volume of dollars than some of the other requests we've seen in. If we have a request from your entity that's in process right now for something outside public safety and public health costs, and it's relatively simple, like for PPE or things like that, we're going to go ahead and get those pushed through. If it's one that's going to require review and more conversations with you as the entity, those will probably be set aside for right now so we can focus on our public safety costs. I know I said a lot through 7 slides. I don't know, I think Paul Joyce is on. Paul, did you want to comment on the transfer of funds and how State Board of Accounts is looking at that, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Lori go through that because we sent out just a couple memos yesterday and the day before, so I think Lori has them keyed up and ready to go.
Thank you.
Okay, we did send out 2 memos. One went out Tuesday, and it was a modification of the memo we sent out on April 29th, and it talks about the same procedures. You're going to get these reimbursements for your payroll costs for public safety and public health. You're going to put them in your CARES grant fund. You're going to move the expenses for those payroll, which would restore the fund balance. It would also restore the appropriation in those lines. We realize that appropriation is no longer needed because you've already paid these salaries, so your council can reduce that appropriation, which just leaves it in your fund balance. Okay, so that was the first memo that went out. The second one went out late yesterday afternoon. And in order to provide more flexibility for your use of these funds, what we are allowing is you have to, you're going to have to make a decision for the county and issue or establish an ordinance to allow this during the health emergency. But if you do that, as outlined in the memo, what you can do is instead of reimbursing those expenses, once that money's in the CARES grant fund, you can then create a claim that moves the money from the transfer of the funds from the CARES grant to your general fund. Okay, you can only move the amount that's supported by that public health and public safety payroll cost. You're limiting to that, but you can move that into the general fund, which will then can be appropriated as any other general fund money would be. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility on that. And we can take any questions that you have on that.
David Butler, I'm going to ask the first question. I'm sure I'll get this on slide 2 of Dan's slides. I think it's bullet point 2. It still says it has to be money that had not yet been appropriated, I think, for the budget year. But just want to clarify that the presumptive eligibility, though, for public safety this year's calendar year overrides that and is allowed, even though it was already budgeted before March. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, David, that's correct. That slide 2 was just an overview, and the public safety guidelines, absolutely, this it can be budgeted and still be pushed through. So that's not an issue.
Okay, thanks.
Lori, are you saying that we have to move the money for the reimbursement of payroll into those funds and then do a reduction? We can't just skip that step and not move it, not increase their appropriation?
That you have two options. So the first option is to do exactly what you've been doing with your COVID, which is to move the expenses into the COVID grant fund to match your reimbursement, which restores both the fund balance in the originating general or public safety and restores that appropriation. But because you don't need that appropriation, you can reduce it, and that leaves it in as an unappropriated balance in your public safety or general fund. The other option is to move it directly to your general fund if you decide as a county to do that. So you have a choice.
Lori, this is Pam. There is a question that came across chat asking, we are not allowed to move money from CARES Act reimbursement to EMS or health funds. Are those allowable funds?
You wouldn't transfer money if you were to if you were to move the expenses out of those funds, that would restore the funds that you used in those for the payroll costs. The transfer is to going from CARES to the general fund. And then from there, you can appropriate as you would. You can follow procedures to transfer it to rainy day.
Okay, Dan? Yes, Dan, are EMS and health department funds allowable funds as far as the salary claim form?
Absolutely, those would qualify.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Also, I have a question if there is a sample ordinance form, which would be a State Board of Accounts question.
No, we don't have a sample for what your ordinance should look like. It needs to address your decision to do that, but it would be similar to what you've been doing during this emergency as far as establishing ordinances for.
Yeah, I mean, if David wants to put one up, we'll work on it with him, but we don't normally give copies of ordinances out. I mean, it's basically just an ordinance saying this is what we want to do with the money, period.
Okay.
Don't overthink the ordinance.
Okay, this is Jackie, and I have a question. I just want to verify to make sure because I kind of got conflicting thoughts in my head. The health fund and the EMS funds are appropriate for salary expenditures, but to get the money back into those funds as opposed to the general fund, you have to do an adjustment. Is that correct? The only claim transfer can be from the CARES Act fund to the general fund. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's really what you're talking about right there, Jackie, is in the way you've already been doing things, okay? That replenishes the money that was spent out of those specific funds. That was the first memo, okay? That just does it exactly the same way everything else has been done, except it includes now these salaries that were necessarily already budgeted, but we don't care because that's what the OIG and everybody else said. The
Right.
second way is just an opportunity that says if you need the money and you want to move it straight from the CARES Act fund to the general fund, you can create an ordinance and do that.
Correct.
It just gives that a little bit more flexibility in there.
And who will create the ordinance? The county council or the county commissioners?
The commissioners.
It would be the executive people that claim the money to begin with.
Okay.
David, I've received this question a couple of times already. If a county has a jail lit and they pay for salaries of jailers out of that, they can again replenish that revenue that they back into the jail lit fund and then transfer it back out to the process and eventually get it back into the county general fund.
You can, if that's what you want to do. That would be using both ordinances, I guess, but I don't know why you'd want to do it that way, but the first way, if you want to replenish your lit, go ahead. That's the first memo. If you don't want to replenish your lit, use the second memo, send it straight to the general fund.
Hi, this is Nancy Marsh, Hendricks County Auditor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can't tell. Okay. I had this question yesterday from a township fire department. I'm in Hendricks. So we have our Washington Township Fire Department, which is an enormous fire department, and they're asking to submit a claim for their fire personnel. I looked at their budget. Their personal services budget is $13 million. I mean, they would take every dime of it. How do we? I don't want to seem selfish, or how do we attempt to be fair? We have huge needs in the county too, but they are legitimately a township fire department.
Jackie.
I'm not hearing you, Paul.
Right. They actually serve me, so they're a wonderful fire department. But that being said, it's up to your executive. They're the ones that are going to get to choose who they and how they distribute that money out. So they're going to have to make that decision on how they choose to distribute the money Hendricks County got. And if that means they want it to go there instead of somebody else, the decision when they made to send it out and allow the communities to make that decision, they left it at the local governments to make up those choices.
We've received a few claims from a couple libraries and the 4-H, and but before they allowed the recovery of this payroll, I didn't see how we could ever get up to it.
Well, I don't think you're going to be able to do all of it. I don't think it's meant to do that. I think it's just meant to give once again, you go to maximum flexibility to local governments, and I was going to say this is as close to revenue replacement that you can get without calling it revenue replacement. We'll just call it expense replacement. But Yeah, I would say that's honestly probably it could be a special meeting that the commission is going to have to sit down and discuss what the needs of their whole community is. And then you also have to remember different parts in that community also got monies, like in your case, Avon, maybe Brownsburg, different places got monies as well. So some towns got money, so they also may be helping fund some of the things that are going on in the townships. So I've talked to a few townships out there, and for the most part, they said the counties have been fairly fair with the distribution of the funds. But I do think that that's probably county by county. So I just encourage the commissioners to do what's best for the county and the community as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah, I would concur with Paul on that one, Nancy. I know it's a tough call, but it's a management decision.
Okay. Thank you.
This is David Botworth again, and I just want to, thank Dan and Paul for working through this, because I know for months we've kind of been waiting on this clarification from U.S. Treasury on this being an allowable expense. But it is a really significant change, and it does allow counties, if they choose to do so, to kind of replenish their budget for this year on these salaries, and then I would give strong consideration to saving that money for 2022 budget, when we expect to see income tax collections decline due to the economic situation going on now. We'll see that decline in income tax revenue in 2022 for the most part. So I think it's a great opportunity to put this money aside so that you can try to balance your 2022 budget without significant reductions. If the county chooses to do so, again, they don't have to do it that way, but this is definitely an opportunity to start thinking about your 2022 budget and make sure you're going to have enough revenue to provide services. So.
Yeah, I think it's a game changer for us, for sure.
That's good to hear, Nancy, because we want to make it as an ease of getting the funds back to you. We think these payroll costs are the easiest way for you all to gather your costs and then get it over to us. And we actually had, if I remember right, I think the town of Brazil, 2 days after we had posted the guidelines, had already sent in the appropriate payroll records and everything else. And we've got a wire set up to send to them for their complete allocation of their CARES Act funds that they'll probably have on Monday.
My girls are working on it now, so.
Great.
There are a couple of questions in chat, if I might ask them. One is the moving of money or reduction of budget is only dealing with the new wages allowance, but for all other expenditures, we're expending directly from the CARES Fund, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the second one is, can the county use this reimbursement of salary expenses to purchase equipment that needs to be purchased from COVID situations? Also, would the county council have to make an appropriation for the purchase of the equipment?
It would be a county decision how you use the money, and it would be appropriated as you would other general fund money.
So the answer, yes.
The answer is, once the money comes back, the county can spend it on anything that general fund money can be spent on.
That's a good point, David. I don't think you're limited to coronavirus relief fund again once it goes back into your general fund. So that's a good point.
That is correct.
This is Bob, auditor from Tippecanoe County. The March 1st starting date, is that pay date or work date to be reimbursable?
Work date, Bob.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I would suggest if you got a payroll service, which most of us do now, they should be able to either run a report for you, or you have the capability of running a report for that particular time period. That would be probably the easiest way to do that.
There's another question that says, does public safety, et cetera, payroll include
Yep.
in addition to the salary?
It does,
Benefits.
and I think I tried to touch on that a little bit. You know, you're gonna have to supply other documentation for that, for your medical insurance, your INPERS payments, your Social Security, et cetera. We're glad to do that, but we think going through the payroll, just the direct payroll costs first, hopefully will get you most, if not all, of your allocation, and that's a lot easier to review for us, but we're glad to look at that also.
Thank you.
I do think this could make life a lot easier on auditors to do this in one application for the salaries and get the money back, and then again, the county can still spend it on COVID-related items if they choose to, or again, park it in the general fund and save it as a reserve. So I think that's part of the great thing about this process is now it can literally be one report, one claim, makes it easier on everybody as far as paperwork.
David, that's a good point, because right now David Clark, who is doing all the heavy lifting for us on reviewing the forms and approving them and so forth, on a weekly basis, you can go anywhere from 100 to 140 reimbursement forms, some of them with a fair amount of documentation, but not for a lot of dollar amounts. This would allow us to really focus on big dollars and still turn around, I think, a significant number of reimbursement forms each week and get money out within that 14-day window. So, valid point.
Dan, earlier this morning when we were running through the slides, we had kind of discussed the fact that if people have projects that they have turned into IFA, those are still being accepted and reviewed, correct?
I would say the ones that are fairly easy for us to review and process, we're going to do that. The more complicated ones that may be for construction of things or so forth, we're probably going to be contacting those entities, letting them know that we're going to focus on payroll costs, and we'll come back to this one if they still have money left in their allocation. Because I think, as we've touched upon it, if they can get their whole allocation through payroll costs and it goes in the general fund, then I think the entity can make a decision on those projects and use the general fund dollars. But those ones that are more difficult for us to review, we'll be calling the individual entities, letting them know we're going to put those on a review stack and wait for the payroll cost to come through.
Thank you.
Yep.
Unless there's any other questions, or if there are more questions, they still have the email address you can send questions to, the COVID email address. But I really appreciate Dan and Paul getting together on this so quickly and clarifying this, because I know there were a lot of claims that were perhaps in the process, or the counties were getting ready to spend substantial amount of monies. And this just provides one extra, or really a great deal more flexibility, and again allows you to start thinking about your 2022 budget and maybe parking some of this money in a reserve account to prepare for 2022. So again, appreciate their time, and again, this is recorded, so we'll put it up on our website, and please be sure to share it with your other council people, commissioners, auditors, other office holders. It's just a great opportunity to use this money in the best manner possible if the county decides. So,
David, we just had two questions pop up.
okay.
One of them is, our county will not have any payroll to submit. We have used all of our COVID expenses. So will our claims be held back?
When we call to discuss those, if they're easy ones, we're going to process them. If they're ones that require a different review, David or one of our members of our team will be calling for more information on that. When they call, if you could let us know that you don't have any payroll expenses you're planning on processing, and we'll try to do our best to also get this one processed.
Okay, and we also have one that says, if we pay our PSAP, and I assume payroll, can we receive the refund into the general fund with the ordinance.
You will never receipt it into the general fund. You will always receipt it back into the CARES fund. Anything done by any ordinance will be done through a transfer from the CARES Act fund to your general fund. Does that make sense, Pam?
I believe so. I'll circle back around with the person who asked the question.
If it didn't, then just have them get a hold of me directly or Lori, and we can talk about it with them.
That sounds great. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Again, thanks everybody, and thanks Dan and Paul for having your all's team put this information together. I think it's great news, and like I say, it's not quite replacement revenue, but it certainly looks like it, I guess I'll say. But it's a great opportunity for counties again to prepare for future decline in revenue. So thanks for all your help on it. So
Thank you, David.
okay.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.